Let us begin. There's something strange about realizing that a lot of who you are wasn't actually chosen. Not in some dramatic way, okay, but more in like one day you catch yourself reacting and thinking, wait, why do I always do that in that situation? Why do I always go quiet here? Why do I always explain myself too much over here? Why does my chest tighten when someone asks me simple questions? And the unsettling part is that you've done it for so long that it feels so normal. It feels like a personality, okay? But it really isn't. It's conditioning. It's something that happened slowly and very slowly, as a matter of fact, to the point that you never noticed it was happening. I'm not a psychologist or a guru. I am Marisha, learning my own mind and questioning who I was and sharing it with you. This isn't your regular show. This is rewiring. Now, most people assume that trauma is the loud stuff, okay? The obvious events, the things that you can point out and say, oh, this happened because that's why I am like this. But the deeper damage isn't always loud. It's behavioral, okay? It's the way that you learn to read the room and energies before reading yourself. You didn't just learn how to survive situations. You learned how to become digestible to others. And no one really talks about that. You know, how the mind doesn't just protect you, it edits you. It removes parts, soften edges, and builds this version of you that won't cause problems for your current lifestyle. So, and then it hands you the version of you and tells you, this is you now. This is, your improved and optimized version that's going to help you and keep you safe in this situation. So be this. Or so that's what your mind thinks. And so you comply, okay, not consciously, just obediently, automatically. And so you learn to smile here, you learn to soften your voice at this time, you learn not to ask questions and just shut up. And you learn when your emotions are just too much and your existence feels like it needs permission. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Where was I? As I was saying. So yeah, you learn those we call it social cues, okay? And what's really uncomfortable about it is that later you defend those behaviors, okay? You start calling it your nature, your temperament, your personality. But some of that calm that you are so proud of, that is just the fear that learned good manners, okay? And some of that independence that you have, some of it, is just someone who learned very early on not to rely on anyone. Now, that's the darker psychology that people avoid because it just removes the comfort story. What happens is that you start to see how often you shrink before anyone else threatens you, before anyone at all threatens you. You start to learn how to preempt rejection instead of risking authenticity, and how you over-explain so that no one misunderstands you, or apologizing without even noticing that you're apologizing. And the worst part about this isn't really the behavior itself, but realizing how automatic it is to you. Like, you are not choosing to do those in those moments. You are just executing it like an old safety protocol. And here's here's something that people don't really like to hear, okay? You don't always struggle because you are broken, okay? Sometimes you struggle because your nervous system is so loyal to the version of you that survived. Success isn't scary because you fear the failure. Success is scary because it threatens the identity that kept you alive, okay? So the mind resists and doesn't do so dramatically or consciously, but quietly through hesitations, delays, and distractions and self doubt. We call it overthinking, but it's just actually identity protection. And once you notice that, a lot of things starts to feel very strange to you because when you start to notice it, you start to watch yourself very carefully and not in a judgmental way, but just purely observation. And it starts to become clear to you how very predictable you actually are and how very scripted your life has become. For example, your tone, it changes in certain rooms. Your body tenses around certain people or certain personalities, and or your voice shifts depending on received emotional power, or stuff like that. And you realize that you are not just reacting to people, you are reacting to memory stored in your nervous system long after the threat has long passed. And the hard truth about this is that some of your biggest problems aren't because you don't know better. No. It's because knowing better would require you to abandon the version of you that felt safe. And that is where real discomfort lives. Not in the pain, but in the awareness. Because now you see it, and seeing it means you just can't pretend anymore than you already are. And honestly, finding yourself in that situation can feel very lonely and very disorienting and a little unsettling, because it's like realizing that the life that you're living now makes sense, but not in a way that feels true to you. You start to notice the gaps between who you feel that you are and who you have been performing to be acceptable. And sometimes the gap between those two hurts a lot because there's grief in it. There's a lot of grief in it because grief for the part of you that learned to stay hidden, that learned to like tuck itself away just so you can feel accepted. Grief for the spontaneity that got replaced with by vigilance. And here's the part that lingers, okay? The version of you that feels the most familiar right now might not actually be the version that is the most honest. And the resistance that you feel towards a change, that isn't always fear of the unknown, okay? It's sometimes the fear of losing the identity that has helped you survive for so long. It's basically like losing a friend that you have known almost your whole life, that you have been attached to the hip with. So you move slower, okay? You start to question more of your life and you stop rushing to label yourself. And maybe for the first time, you start to realize that you are not trying to become someone new. You are just trying to locate the part of you that never got the chance to exist without being scrutinized. And that process isn't always pretty, okay? It's not as awe-inspiring as, you know, aesthetically transforming. No, it's far more quieting, very confrontative, confronting and slightly uncomfortable. But what I can tell you is that it is very real. And once you see it, you can feel where the script ends and where you actually begin.